Pokémon has ballooned into an incredible, essential franchise. You simply can't imagine what your life would have been like without it, particularly in the early Gen 1 days of the red and green versions, or blue version for those of us outside of Japan. There are many minor interesting details about Pokémon that fans may not know or have forgotten about, despite many infamous exploits like the missing number glitch. So, here are 10 Pokémon things that you might not have known about Pokémon. If you want more Pokémon, sub to this channel as the latest game, Legends Arceus, is fast approaching and will have plenty of coverage when it releases. One of the best parts of playing Pokémon, whether it's the video game or the card game, is the concept of collecting as much as you can. There are hundreds of different Pokémon species just waiting to be caught, so it makes sense that the inspiration for Pokémon also came from a similar hobby, insect collecting. That's right, the original concept of Pokémon came from Satoshi Tajiri, one of the creators of Game Freak, and his hobby of insect collecting as a child, combined with the fascination of the Game Boy's link cable. He even described imagining little bugs crawling through the cables between Game Boys at one point. When deciding which platform to develop Pokémon on, the Game Boy's link cable was the deciding factor for Tajiri, fueled by a frustrating encounter with the Dragon Quest II item. On the Famicom, Tajiri desperately wanted a hard-to-find item from Dragon Quest and tried to find a way to acquire the item from fellow Pokémon creator Ken Sugimori, who happened to have two, but to no avail since the Famicom had no way to connect two games. Thus, we have the inspiration for utilizing the Game Boy's link cable to trade Pokémon with friends. Nintendo at first couldn't grasp the concept of using the link cable to trade collectibles or the appeal of Pokémon in general. Still, they trusted Tajiri's game development reputation and decided to give it a shot. The rest, as they say, is history. Most fans of Pokémon know that Pokémon is short for Pocket Monsters, indicated by trainers stashing away Pokeballs they've used to catch any given Pokémon in their literal pocket. What's less known is that this wasn't Tajiri's first choice for the name. Instead, he hoped to call the game Capsule Monsters, but ran into trademark issues. Shortening Capsule Monsters to Capmon didn't quite hit the same mark either, and the name eventually found a home in Pokémon. Alright, if I were to ask you which Pokémon was first created, maybe you'd say Pikachu, since Pikachu is arguably the most recognizable Pokémon of all time, or you might say Bulbasaur, since its national Pokédex number is literally 001. Arguments can also be made for Charizard or Venusaur as the covers for Red and Green, but in actuality, the first Pokémon designed was Rideon. Rideon might not be number 1 of the national dex, but according to Ken Sugimori, its internal ID number is 1. It makes sense too, since you'll see the Rideon sprite a lot throughout Gen 1, whether in Pokémon Gym statues or as sprites for other Pokémon when in your team menus. One of the most iconic secrets was Mew, a Pokémon after the legendary Mewtwo. To fully appreciate how incredible the mythical Mew was, you had to be a kid growing up in the mid-90s, honestly. Mew was like this playground folklore, something you'd hear about at the park, and it added to the mystique of Gen 1. The way Mew was integrated into the cartridge is just as surprising, because Nintendo had no clue, since Game Freak simply popped Mew in at the very end of the development process. Mew couldn't be found in the game without exploiting a glitch or cheating, but that didn't stop trainers from doing what they needed to do to catch Mew and add it to their team. Eventually, Mew was distributed to select few trainers officially, and a growing trend of special events were established in future games. Players would gather at these events and get special mystery gift Pokémon or items, many of which included mythical Pokémon like Mew. Arguably one of the biggest positives of playing Gold, Silver, and Crystal is that the Gen 2 games let you explore Kanto from Gen 1 after you became champion. As a kid, this was an incredible experience before ending in a climactic battle against Red in Mount Silver. What fans probably don't know is that the Kanto region almost didn't make the cut in Gen 2. After all, Kanto is a vast region, which means a lot of data for the Game Boy hardware. Cramming both Johto and Kanto onto the same cartridge was no small task. It was nearly impossible. That is, until Satoru Iwata, who later became the president of Nintendo, showed Game Freak a way to compress the data to be manageable. There are story implications for why Kanto appears sparse in certain areas, but we have a technical explanation as well, which is why areas like Viridian Forest are dramatically different in Gen 2. Either way, Game Freak owed a lot to Mr. Iwata, and there's even a heartwarming Easter egg later in Ultra Moon and Ultra Sun referencing Mr. Iwata's role during Gen 2's development. The Game Corner is notorious for several reasons, especially in Gens 1 and 2. For starters, it posed as Team Rocket's original hideout in Celadon City. That same Game Corner was also the only way to get a Porygon in the game for a cool 9,999 coins. But really, the Game Corners were known for one thing: being a glorified casino. Yeah, you could spend in-game money to acquire coins to then bet on the slot machines next to NPCs to then use your winnings for everything from Pokémon to rare and powerful TMs. The Game Corner appeared in Gens 2, 3, and 4, but with Pokémon Platinum, things got a little weird, specifically for South Korea and Europe. Around this time onward, anti-gambling laws in those countries grew more strict. The rating systems were no longer going to give Pokemon a kid-friendly rating, so to help avoid any rating above an E, the casinos were removed from future games, including the Gen 2 and 3 remakes. Yeah, Wooper is based on a real-life animal. You'd think most Pokemon are, right? For example, Butterfree and Beedrill are based on their obvious insect in real-life counterparts, but still things get strange when you have water tortoises like Blastoise with literal water cannons. However, Wooper is based on the water-based salamander called an axolotl, straight up. Who would have guessed? So Gen 2 actually had a demo that not a lot of folks remember. There's sparse footage of it online, but one of the cooler concepts is that the protagonist of Gen 2, Gold, actually had a skateboard instead of a bike. The footage shows Gold clipping through various map parts, which is clearly a bug, but the interesting thing is that he's also popping ollies on the skateboard, potentially meant to be able to jump back up from ledges or to reach hard to obtain spaces. Of course, the skateboard never made it to the final cut, and instead we got the Gen 1 standard bike that players were accustomed to. Funny enough, later on in the Ruby Sapphire versions, we see the Acro Bike, which lets you pop wheelies and hop around. So the inspiration for having spots that you could only reach with a key item was kind of always there. The skateboard also actually has a canonical tie-in, as Gold is shown riding a skateboard in the Pokemon manga. Alright, so this one was my favorite because of just how bonkers it was and just how ridiculous at the time, but it's absolutely true. And newer Pokemon fans, you guys might not be aware of it, but in the Pokemon anime, an episode was banned for giving nearly 700 Japanese kids seizures. Yeah, in the episode in question, Pikachu uses a Thunderbolt on a bunch of missiles from a Porygon that, when they collided, caused an incredibly rapid strobe effect of red and blue lights flashing in a dizzying manner. Almost immediately, viewers at home reported headaches, nausea, and full-on seizures that required hospitalization. Almost recklessly, even more viewers had seizures later when newscasts literally replayed the scene during their broadcast when reporting on the seizures. Which, you'd think they'd know better, but here we are. It just doesn't get more ironic than that. Thankfully, the episode was pulled from airwaves almost immediately and has never been broadcast again. Alright, so there's 10 things you didn't know about Pokemon, or probably didn't. Maybe you knew all of this already and are super smart or something, I don't know. Pokemon Legends Arceus is rapidly approaching though, and we're excited for the game coming so soon. If you're a veteran Pokemon fan, let me know in the comments your best Pokemon trivia that fans might not know. And if you're new to the series, let me know if there's anything you're excited about for Pokemon. Be sure to check out our upcoming Legends Arceus videos and subscribe to GameSpot for all things gaming. Until next time.